Today's percent problems are on simple interest. So first, obviously, we need to know what is simple interest. And simple interest, it's a percent of an amount borrowed that is paid to the lender in addition to the amount borrowed. In other words, if I go to the bank and I ask to borrow $1,000, they're not just going to say, okay, here's $1,000, pay us back whenever you can. You're going to say, okay, here's $1,000, you're going to have to pay us back, and you're going to have to pay us back more than we gave you. So I have to pay more than 1,000 back to them. That's how the bank makes the money. Okay, so there is actually a formula to figure this out, and that formula is I equals PRT. Okay, so in this formula, I is the amount of interest. That's what we're trying to find. Okay, P stands for principal, and that's the amount of money you start with. Okay, so if I borrow $1,000, my principal is $1,000. If I borrowed $3,000, my principal is 3,000. Then R stands for the rate. That's your interest rate, what they call it, and that's your percent. Okay, that's the percent actually you're paying back. T is for time, and the time is always has to be in years. So if they give it to you in months, you'd have to change that to what part of a year it is. It would be a fraction. Okay? But all you do is you use this formula. You plug in your principal, you plug in your rate, you plug in your time, you multiply those together. That's the amount of interest you have to pay. It's that easy. It's that straightforward. Okay? So, a couple examples. Mr. Olson borrows $1,000, has to pay it back with 4% interest. If he pays it back in 1 year, how much does he pay back total? Okay, so I'm going to start with my formula. I always am going to write that down first. Anytime I have a formula, I'm going to put that down. So my P stood for principal, which is the amount I started with, the amount I borrowed. That was $1,000. So it's 1,000 times my rate. That was the percentage. So it's 4%. Now, just like with the tax, anytime I have a percent I want to use, I have to change it to a decimal. So 4%, if you remember from that video, you take the decimal, you move it 2 places to the left, and so 4% is 0.04. And then the T is time in years, and this says I pay it back in 1 year, so that would be 1. So all I have to do is multiply those together. So 1,000 times 0.04, that's obviously just going to be all zeros and a 4. And then remember, count a number of decimal places up here. There's none there, 2 here, so I need 2 in my answer. So it goes right there, and that means it is $40. So I would be paying $40. So the question, though, is how much does he pay back total? Well, I have to pay the $1,000 I borrowed and the $40 in interest. So it's $1,040 total that I'm paying back. Always make sure you go back and read the question and make sure. Sometimes they might just want the interest. Sometimes they want the total, so you got to make sure you're answering the right question. So here's another example. If a bank pays 2.2% simple interest on a savings account and Matt puts $500 in, how much will he have at the end of 1 year if he doesn't put any more in and he doesn't take any out? He just lets that $500 sit for a year. Okay? So again, it says it's simple interest. So my formula, P times R times T. My principal this time is the amount I'm putting into that savings account, or Matt is, that's $500. My rate is the percentage, 2.2. Let's move the decimal 2 places. 1, 2. I'm going to need a 0 there. .022 is my rate. And the time, I'm going to leave it at for 1 year. So Matt puts in there, doesn't touch it for a year. All right, let's multiply then. 500 times .022. I get 0010. Bring down a 0, 0010. Add those up, and I get that. And I need no decimal places here, 3 here. So 3 decimal places. It's going to make it 11. So that means the amount of interest he's going to gain in that year is $11. In other words, the bank is just going to give him an extra $11 for leaving that money there. So the question, though, remember, go back and check the question. How much will he have at the end of a year? Well, he'll have the $500 he put in plus the 11 in interest, so he'll have $511. So just make sure, write the formula down. Careful when you're multiplying. Remember to change percent to a rate. And then make sure you read the question and see, do they just want the interest or do they want the final amount? So you have to make sure you're answering the right question.